So we've been in the book of James this fall, and James is in your New Testament. It was written reportedly by Jesus' brother James, and you'll find it after the book of Hebrews. And James is an interesting book because James is in many ways unlike many of the other books in the New Testament, because the book of James is what they call wisdom literature. And wisdom literature sort of means it's straightforward, it gets to the point. And particularly the kind of wisdom that James has been focusing on is what are the things that are necessary for a community to stay together? The most profound challenge that the church faces, not the individual Christian, but that the church faces, is the capacity to hang together. Because there are all sorts of things that come against being together. And there are all sorts of challenges that we have to face. And the challenge that we talked about last week is whenever you pull people together, what happens when people get together? They begin to talk. And when they talk, words come out. And words create all sorts of issues. And so last week we talked about words. This week we're going to talk about two different kinds of wisdom. And in particular, what I want us to focus on is something that happens in communities that is rarely talked about, but I so appreciate James bringing it up. And it's this little thing called envy. So let's take a look at James chapter 3, verses 13, and we're going to go into verse 3 in chapter 4, and then we end with verse 7 and 8. But this is the word of the Lord this morning. Who is wise and understanding among you? Show by your good life that your works are done with gentleness born of wisdom. But if you have bitter envy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not be boastful and false to the truth. Such wisdom does not come from above, but is earthly, unspiritual, devilish. For where there is envy and selfish ambition, there will also be disorder and wickedness of every kind. But the wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, willing to yield, full of mercy and good fruits, without a trace of partiality or hypocrisy. And a harvest of righteousness is sown in peace for those who make peace. Those conflicts and disputes among you, where do they come from? Do they not come from your cravings that are at war within you? You want something and do not have it, so you commit murder, and you covet something and cannot obtain it, so you engage in disputes and conflicts. You do not have because you do not ask. You ask and do not receive because you ask wrongly in order to spend what you get on your pleasures. And then skipping down to verses 7 and 8. Submit yourselves, therefore, to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. This is the word of the Lord. So James lays out for us this idea called envy. And he's trying to point out that envy creates something. It creates disorder and lack of connection. I remember I graduated from high school in 1985, right? I know, I look younger than that, right? 1985. And they were just starting to introduce computers then. I actually didn't use my first computer until my freshman year in college, but in terms of writing a paper and all that stuff. But at Loyola, for some reason, they decided to give us a class my senior year in computer programming. And I can firmly tell you, I had no idea what was going on. I remember sitting in that class just completely clueless. The only thing that I remember was that whenever you programmed a computer, you always had to use these two words, if and then. If and then. That the whole root of computer programming is based on these two words. If this, then that. If this, then that. If this, then that. And so I think James is sort of doing that. He's doing an if-then statement. And here it is. If you find yourself in a state of disharmony, disrepute, if you as a community are struggling to get along and connect with each other, then perhaps the problem is something called envy. Which is interesting. Because I don't know about you, but when I encounter communities and when I myself am involved with other people and I find ourselves disintegrating and going our own way and struggling to really remain connected with each other, I rarely ever hear the word envy brought up as a source of the problem. But James is saying that envy is a real issue. Envy and selfish ambition. We don't think it because we're almost so used to it. I remember several years ago when Michael was playing in-house baseball and he had an opportunity to pitch. And Michael usually did a great job pitching, but this one game he just didn't have it going on. And he got pulled and they put in another kid to pitch. And this kid started doing pretty well. And I remember finding myself in a dilemma. And the dilemma was this. I know I'm supposed to be cheering for the team right now, but if this kid is good, then maybe Michael's going to get bumped. And so, just sitting there like okay, what's going to happen, Like envy. Envy is everywhere. A lot of the places where we should be together and we should be encouraging each other and we should be lifting each other up, we instead invisibly, right? It's invisible. No one sees it, but envy just seeps in and destroys sense of community. There's a list. It's not a biblical list. But there's kind of a famous list out there called the 7 deadly sins, right? Most of you have probably heard of them. And if I were to ask you, what ones are on the list, most of you would probably come up with most of them, right? Pride, anger, lust, gluttony, greed. Most people get those, right? One of the two most people forget about, sloth and envy. And what's interesting is a lot of people say the interesting thing about envy on that list is envy is the only one on that list that you get no pleasure from. All the other ones are sort of an immediate pleasure, and then all the problems come afterwards, right? Like anger, when you first have that outburst of anger, it kind of feels good, right? Or pride initially sort of puffs you up. There's sort of a kind of a pleasure with it. Envy, when you're in a state of envy, it's not good at all. It just ruins everything. Envy. Envy, in some ways, it's not the same as jealousy. Envy regards our sadness in reaction to someone else's good. Jealousy is sort of a response to a threat of losing something good on your own. Envy is our response of internal sadness to someone else's good. Thomas Aquinas, the famous Catholic philosopher, said that envy shows up in certain ways. In other words, sometimes we have a hard time identifying that we're in a state of envy. And so he says you can sort of identify envy in certain ways. Number one is, he calls it tale-bearing, which means whenever you report on someone else's good news, you can't help but sort of just throw a little zinger in there. Like, yeah, they have a beautiful new home. But the guy is a total jerk at work. Do you know that? Right? like talebearing. You report someone else's good news, but you make sure you throw in there just a little zinger so that everybody knows like it's not as good as it gets. Another is like detraction, you know. You congratulate someone on it, but you sort of like, you know, let everybody know it wasn't that big of a deal. You know, like congrats on getting into college. I guess they have to let everybody in, right? Right? You know, that's how like envy shows up, right? Like in these little things. Or envy genuinely shows up at like joy at others' misfortune. There were probably great cheers in Pittsburgh when Terrell Suggs went down, right? Right? And I'm going to freely confess that I will return the favor if some of their players get hurt, right? But like, you know, or envy is grief at another's prosperity. Like, you know, someone gave an illustration and said, let's picture this. Like, picture your life. And like, you know, you're happy. Like, everything's okay. It's fine. And then you get an invitation to your 25th anniversary or your 25th reunion at school. And you show up and you start finding out all the things that other people are doing and all the accomplishments they've made. And all of a sudden, this life that you were completely satisfied with or reasonably satisfied with before you went into the reunion, you come out of the reunion and you're miserable. And the only thing that happened in between was that you attended a reunion. None of your circumstances changed, but what changed was envy. Envy seeped in. And there's a relational component to envy. That's what makes envy so challenging in communities. Now, advertisers need to create a sense of envy, and that, you know, that may be what it is. And I'm not necessarily saying that's as destructive as what I think James is talking about. The kind of envy that James is talking about is this relational envy. And the way you see it played out is like this. When I was growing up, we used to have chickens. And when we had chickens, you would feed the chickens. And within the chicken flock, there was a certain pecking order. And chicken number 1 ate first, chicken number 2 ate second, chicken number 3 ate third, and right on down the line. And so when you threw the food, everyone knew that chicken number 1 had first dibs. And if chicken number 2 fought chicken number 1 for the food, there would be a throwdown. And there was a certain pecking order. And here's the thing. Chicken number 1 didn't care at all about chicken number 8. Chicken number 1 was focused on chicken number 2. Chicken number 8 had no problems with chicken number 1. Chicken number 8's problems were chicken number 7 and chicken number 9. Right? And that's what envy does. Like, there's lots of people, you know, like, there's lots of people in life that, like, good things can happen to them, and it's great. But if my neighbor's house just gets a little nicer than mine, right? And that's why envy is so corrosive to community. Because here we are, we're gathered together, and we're essentially the same, right? I mean, some of us are a little different places and all that stuff, but we kind of live the same life, you know, and so we're all living this life together, and envy just seeps in. What are we to do about it? Well, the first thing I think that James would want us to know is that you feel the pull of it. Feel the pull. That's why he talks about, he says, look, you know, when there's all this disharmony and there's all of these problems and you're struggling to get along as a community, have you ever considered that it might be the pull of envy that's getting to you? You know, I've been to Niagara Falls, and one of the things that I find interesting in Niagara Falls is very far away from the actual waterfall, like way farther up the river or whatever it is. There's all these signs that say, do not swim. Do not swim. Because even though the water looks calm, underneath the water there is this incredible pull towards the waterfall. And outwardly, you might think, oh, I can jump in. It's a calm, like, river at this point. The waterfall is much farther down. I can jump in, but you jump in and you have no idea what's pulling you. Envy's sort of like that. On the surface of your life, you're sort of like, this is fine, everything's good, everything looks good, right? Outwardly, things are good, but inwardly, there is this pull, and it's just like dragging you right towards this fall. And I think one of the first things that James would say is, like, feel the pull. Feel the pull of the envy. And like I said earlier, the pull of envy is often the most intense with those closest to you. Hello, Facebook, right? Right? Those closest to us, and it's pulling us. And what James is saying is that it pulls you towards disintegration. That's what envy does. Envy pulls you to this place of disintegration because you'll never have enough. You'll never be satisfied. Someone will always have a little bit more. And so this pull disintegrates community. It doesn't integrate community. In the book of Romans, it has this incredible challenge. It sounds simple, but it's really difficult. That we as followers of Christ are called to rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep. That's the state of your character. That's an integrated community. A community that is able to rejoice with others when they rejoice and to weep with others when they weep is a community that can be integrated. But a community that lacks that capacity can't do it. Feel the pull of envy. And then contrast it with what James says in verse 17 and 18. Listen to what he says, like integrating wisdom looks like. But the wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, willing to yield, full of mercy and good fruits, without a trace of partiality or hypocrisy. And a harvest of righteousness is sown in peace for those who make peace. The pull of God is a pull of integration, peaceable, gentle, willing to yield, full of mercy and good fruits, a harvest of righteousness sown in peace. There's an easy, gentle flow to the wisdom of God. There is a fast, destructive pull of envy. So James, I think, would say, he would say, listen, one of the first things that you need to recognize with envy is just feel its pull and realize you're in its grip. But then he would go on to say something that I think, by the time I'm done, you're probably going to be angry with me for saying it. Okay? And that's okay. Because I think James lays out for us a challenge that gets at the root of envy. And it's the challenge you find in verses 1 to 3. He says, those conflicts and disputes among you, where do they come from? Do they not come from your cravings that are at war within you? You want something and do not have it, so you commit murder, and you covet something and cannot obtain it, so you engage in disputes and conflicts you do not have because you do not ask. One of the most effective cures I have ever experienced for envy, you know what it is? It's not feeling bad about being envious, because that only works so much. You know what one of the most effective cures for not being envious is? Being blessed. Being blessed. See, envy is rooted in the idea that life is sort of a zero-sum game. And that if you have it, I don't, or I can't. And because you've got it, I want it, and I'm miserable because you've got it. And you know what James says to the envious soul? And this is probably where some of you are going to be mad, and I understand why, because I struggle to make sense of this too. James says this: just ask. Are you envious? Are you bitter? Are you full of selfish ambition? Just ask. Listen, the great challenge of faith is this: what if there's really plenty to go around? What if there really is enough? What if there is enough of what we're really looking for? Now, I look, this is where I'm going. I'm thinking refugee crisis. I'm thinking of all the unanswered prayers. I'm thinking of the struggles I know some of my friends, even in this community, are going through. I read this just ask, and I struggle. What are you talking about, God? Just ask. You do not have because you do not ask. Now he goes on to say, look, you ask, and you're asking with the wrong motives, because you're asking just to spend it on your pleasures. And I think what he's saying is this. Look, here's what I think he's saying. If you're asking me, is there plenty of money to go around? If you're asking me if there's plenty of big houses in every neighborhood to go around, if you're asking me if there's plenty of all the material wants that you want to go around, I'm going to say you're probably right. There aren't. There aren't enough of those. But maybe that's not what you really want. Maybe, there isn't enough social prestige to go around for every kid to be the cool kid. But maybe there's enough love. There's not enough stuff to go around for everyone to have whatever they want, but maybe there's enough of what God can give you. The answer to envy isn't to feel guilty. It isn't to just beat yourself up. It seems to me the answer to envy is to live in a place that says, God, I am feeling empty. And I'm going to trust that in you there is enough. And I'm going to ask. And if you don't give it to me, I'm going to keep asking. I'm going to ask until I get to this point where I'm at a place where I'm really ready to receive what it is you want to give me. See, we're not just a community trying to be nice together, right? That's not the goal. The goal of churchONE isn't to be like, we're going to be around, we're going to be nice, we're not going to be envious, we're always going to say kind words. That's not what we fundamentally are. You know what we are? We're a community of faith. We're a community that believes that there is a God of love behind this whole thing we're looking at. And that God of love has promised to supply us with our every need. And we need to learn to ask. And when we live in that place of faith, things like envy just don't make as much sense. James is wise. And the wisdom of James is to move us all to this place of integration. But that's not where we experience life. Most of us experience life in this state of disintegration where everything is pulling apart. And James wants to challenge us to come back together. And if we find ourselves in this place of disintegration, then maybe one of the reasons, there's other reasons, I understand that, but maybe one of the reasons is we're in the grips of envy. And my challenge to you this morning is, do you believe in Jesus Christ? God has given you enough of what you need. And that's why I think James can say, like, submit yourselves therefore to God. Resist the devil and he will flee. Draw near to God and he will draw near to you. Amen? Let's pray. Lord, I thank you for Jesus. I thank you that in Jesus we have enough. In Jesus we have everything. And I want to just confess the envy that just tends to creep into my soul on a regular basis. And I want to ask for your help not to be that way. And I want to ask for your help by helping me see all that you have given me. And I pray this for my friends as well. And I pray that we be a community of faith, living wisely, pulling together, being a whole and not a bunch of parts. And we ask this for your sake, Lord, that we may be glorified. In your name, amen.